What was it like to actually be involved with The Biggest Loser? Like, I think everybody understands what that was, and everybody was watching at a certain time. Like, what was it like to be in that contest?
Honestly, some people have such negative things to say, but for me, it was a dream come true. I mean, I was a small town girl. I wasn't doing a ton of traveling at that time or anything. So to be flown to LA and in front of producers and cameras, and back then we didn't have smartphones at all. This was like 2006. So I think that was flip phone time. Like I had to VHS record and mail the video in. So these days people can kind of create content, but back then it wasn't like that. So to be filmed, and then I made it into there was an episode that was a makeover, and to get someone doing your makeup and have those people doing your hair and just to feel so glamorous. And my season was on something called the Hummingbird Nest Ranch, which is just this gorgeous mansion. So we got to live in a mansion. And then I was a big fan my whole life of Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and our host was Caroline Ray. And so I got to meet her. And I actually didn't really watch the show prior to being on it. So it didn't mean a lot to me to meet the
You're
trainer.
kidding. Wow. You're kidding.
No,
That's funny you didn't watch.
I was on season 3. So it was actually a pretty new show, but it had blown up so quickly. It was a hit when I was on it for sure.
Wow.
I don't remember how many thousands and thousands of people applied. I mean, just the Mall of America, I went to an open casting call. I bet there was a few thousand people in line at the Mall of America. And that was one of, 50 open casting calls that they did. So, I mean, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people applied. So it was just crazy. And then, you know, being a small town girl, being overweight my whole life, I just kind of had this. And then for most of my life, we were very impoverished. Like we didn't have a lot of money. And so in my mind, the sky wasn't the limit. I mean, they teach you that in school, but in my heart, the sky wasn't the limit. And to be picked for that and go to LA and be part of a TV show that was on national TV that, everybody tuned into, because back then there was cable, but there wasn't like the streaming that there is now. Everybody watched TV back then. I don't even know. Did they have remember when you could record network
Yeah,
TV?
like TiVo or something. I'm thinking
Yeah.
of. Yeah,
So everybody would record their shows. You couldn't have them on demand all the time. The recording was a newer thing. So to just be part of that was just, I mean, I myself was like, my eyes were like, whoa.
wow. I saw a recent video of somebody who's like a 40-year-old guy, like trying to explain to a young girl like what it used to be like to watch TV shows. And she was like, well, why don't you just watch until the TV show's over? Then you could stream the whole thing. He's like, there's no, I'm telling you, there's not streaming. Like a TV show would end in June and you'd be left on like a 4-month cliffhanger until the first episode of the next one. You'd have to wait that out like a savage. And this millennial girl just, it could not compute in her head. Like you couldn't, we'll just record it. Like, no, there was no recording even back then. Funny to think back on our struggles.
Yes, and honestly, unless you recorded it, it was kind of difficult to get a copy of the previous season because there
Totally.
wasn't the streaming.
Totally. So funny.
You would
Yeah,
have to
so
like
funny.
buy it on DVD. I think I had to buy the previous seasons on DVD to watch them. I mean,
Wow.
that's the time
we
we're
really
talking.
we really suffered. We really made it through those tumultuous times.
But because of that, the viewership was way higher than it is these days. These days, everybody's spread out. I think the
Good point.
viewership back then was millions and millions and millions. And these days, I don't think millions of people even hardly watch the news anymore. I mean,
Yeah,
you
that's a
know.
really good point. That's a really good point. So yeah, so you told us a little bit about, what it was like to be there. Obviously, you can't be on The Biggest Loser unless you're very unhealthy and quite big. So let's go back to you growing up. I believe is your home state the same as mine, North Dakota, where I was born.
I'm actually from Minnesota, but I went to college in
Minnesota.
North Dakota. Where in
Okay.
North Dakota were you from?
I was born in Bismarck, but I only lived there for like a year and a half. So I can't really call it my home state, but it's the state I was born in.
Yep, I went to college in Grand Forks and we drove through Bismarck one time.
Okay, nice.
Uh, so I grew up in Minnesota, and my parents were very young. They were 21 when they had me, and my mom was not ready to be a mom. So my dad ended up raising me and my little sister all by himself. and he moved in with his mom. He was kind of more of a laborer than, because he was so young when he had us. He didn't have a degree. He never finished his degree or anything. So he had to work 24 hours a day to kind of afford all of us plus grandma. And so we were eating, all of the noodles, the pasta, the potatoes, all the processed food, the mac and cheese. I mean, goulash was like our healthy food, which was macaroni and cheese with tomato sauce and hamburger. And I remember just like endlessly eating this stuff. There was bread at every single meal. I don't know if they told us that was healthy back then or why was there bread at every meal, but there was bread at every meal. And then you would wash it down with some orange juice. That was a pretty common drink at our table, was orange juice and milk. So that's what I grew up on. And then because my dad was working all the time, I was with sitters a lot, like all the time. And so I was really uncomfortable just not ever being home. And I remember just using food as comfort. My mom's gone, my dad's working all the time. So food was comfort. And I just never felt full. I mean, I remember this just constantly. And so I remember I wasn't even in school yet and I was already on my first diet. It wasn't me that put me on the diet. It was everybody else around me because they were like, this girl is huge. We need to put her on a diet. We need to restrict what she's eating, which in retrospect really is, I mean, for all the parents out there, that's a really hard mindset for children, that they're supposed to be taught that they should be hungry, that they're big because you shouldn't really. So for me today, I have some kids that struggle with weight. So I just say, let's focus on protein. Let's focus on movement instead of let's focus on a diet. So then I go into elementary school and I'm picked on quite a bit. I mean, every day the boys would follow me around and just bully me. I'd like to say, for anybody out there who has a bully kid, those kids turned out to be great kids. Like, they're not bad people, but kids are kids. And I was very much bullied. So then again, going back to that comfort of those noodles, the bread, the orange juice. And I don't know if you want me to keep going, but I go into high school and that's when I kind of get a little bit of confidence. My dad remarries. I have a stepmom, so I have a mother figure in my life. We have a little bit more money. So I'm able to play sports now, and I'm in soccer and cross country skiing and golf and track and field, basketball, and I just stay busy all the time. And I'm able to slim down a little bit, like the 160s. But the minute I went to college, I just blew up. So that's when I applied for the TV show The Biggest Loser.
Okay, gotcha. So when you were at college, that would have been what? You're like in the 20s when you finally applied for the show?
So I was 22 when I was on the TV show. Okay. And I went to an open casting call, and I also mailed a VHS in, and then I got an email from like SusieJohnson@gmail.com. And I was thinking, is this real? And it was. And so we flew there, and even when I was flying there, I was thinking, is this really real? It's too good to be true. And they sent me a contract that was like 4 inches thick. It was hundreds of pages, and you had to sign every page. And I was so nervous that my stepmom had to drive across Minnesota to come be with me and read every page to me. And as I signed it, because I was so nervous. But yeah.
Wow. And so your time in college, was it, as you're looking back, was it the same kind of foods that you were eating in elementary school that made you gain the weight back? Or were you getting more hungry than you were before? Like, as you're looking back, what drove the weight gain then?
I think I was definitely having metabolic issues already, because I put the weight on pretty quick. I don't think it was that I was just eating endless ice cream and pizza. My metabolism has always been a little lower, which I now attribute maybe to living in a moldy home growing up, and as well as other things, all this processed food we ate has messed with people's hormones. And so I don't think it was necessarily just binge eating. I think it was me stopping exercising and maybe eating a little more than usual, drinking alcohol. And alcohol is just horrible for your waistline. And then just not knowing, just truly not knowing the right things to eat. I mean, I'm pretty sure I was still eating salads every single day, but yet I was gaining weight. And so I just didn't know about low carb, and I wasn't moving very much.
So when you entered the contest, do you recall what your weight was?
I think it was around 227.
227. Okay. I thought most people on The Biggest Loser were closer to like 3, 4, 500 pounds. Maybe I'm just remembering as the show went on and things got a little bit more extreme that people got up to that height. Were you, was that pretty average for the cohort of people in your show about that weight?
So mine, there was one person from every state. So with 50 people, they did their best to have a whole variety of weights and ages. So I was definitely one of the smallest, and I think I was the youngest person. So
Youngest.
what they did was they had 36 people go home the first day, and whoever lost the most weight at home was going to get to come back on. They never thought in a million years this young girl that didn't have as much to lose was going to beat these 350-pound men, but I did. And at the time, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm amazing. Look at me. I beat everybody. I'm so awesome. Well, now that I'm 40, now I know I had a metabolic advantage over, well, the
Gotcha.
rest of the contestants.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. So your expectations, was this going to be something life-changing? Not just that, it was kind of glamorous and you were going to be on TV, but this was your way out of this situation. You were in a place where you didn't want to be as far as weight and health, and this was the thing that was going to get you out of that. Would you say that was your expectation?
What's really weird is I think most people who are overweight, I don't think that they ever necessarily dream of being glamorous because we kind of are in hiding. Like we don't like our bodies, we don't want attention on us. It gets sickening to be constantly the biggest person in the room. So you just kind of hide back a little bit. So I don't think my intention was ever to be glamorous. It was just to finally not be big. I thought that if I lost all this weight, that people would finally treat me like an equal. And in my head, people weren't treating me like an equal. I would finally get that good job, the big thing. I would finally be lovable because in my mind, between the bullying and my parents being gone and working and my mom basically abandoned me. So I had abandonment issues. I thought if I lose this weight, I'll finally be lovable. I think that was the number one thing. So I lose 66 pounds and I find myself back at my high school weight. And I realize that it's going to need a bit more than that. There's going to have to be some work between here.
It's very interesting, and it's just so, I don't know. It's so sad to hear that that's what the reality of the situation is, and how much worth we put into how we look. And um, yeah, that's a really tough situation. So tell us, how long were you there at the actual mansion? I believe you told me you were one of the ones that had to go home essentially and do the weight loss at home. How long were you at the mansion itself?
I don't remember, but I want to say it was a couple of months. By the time I got kicked off, there was only one contestant after me that got kicked off, and then it was the finale.
Oh,
So
okay,
that's
gotcha.
that's a very interesting thing. And so the people who were at home had a totally different experience than the people who were on the ranch. On the ranch, the film is so long and it changed season to season. I'm interviewing different people on my station who were on the show, and it really varies. In the beginning, of filming 1 week could take 2, 3 weeks to film a week. So if a season is 12 weeks long, people could have been there easily twice as long as that just to
Wow.
film the show.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. And I've talked to people who've been there, talking to you and knowing that you've talked to so many people there. What was it like? Like, what was your day to day there?
So it's very interesting because you picture as you watch the show that maybe a nutritionist is there to tell you what you're going to eat for the day. Maybe there's someone to help you cook. Who knows? Maybe there's a maid. And then, of course, the trainers are there every day to cheer you on, tell you what to do or beat you up, whatever. Um, and that every day is just really structured, but that's not how it is at all. The filming is crazy. You could film at 5 o'clock in the morning, or you could film at 1 a.m. because we were in the desert and they wanted to catch the dark lighting in the cooler temperatures because you can't have the fans and the air conditioning on because it messed with the mics. Today there's better mics, but back then you had to turn it all off because it messed with the mics. So the filming schedule is crazy. You never know in advance when the filming's going to be. So you can't really plan your week out. The trainers were only there when the cameras were there mostly. And later on seasons, I guess there were shadow trainers that would come a couple times a week so that there was more hands-on, but mostly people were alone. That's what it mostly was. And the day-to-day, you're there alone, you're mic'd up, you're working out. It was eat as little as possible, move as much as possible. There wasn't a lot of hand holding. And so if you're in a weight loss, you feel all this pressure, and it's not even about the money, it's about the pressure of the whole situation of wanting to succeed. Very disordered behavior occurs. It's so, and even if you look at when the trainers were there, they're taking these 400-pound people, 300-pound people and telling them, burn and don't stop, even if you have to puke. That is not a recipe for anything except for injury, burnt out hormones. That's not a recipe for health. And anybody who, once you join the health space, realizes that it's like, what would you say, 90% diet and 10% exercise, or even less than that. But they just make it look like it's all about the exercise and less about the nutrition. So
that's
people
the glamorous
were just,
part.
Yeah. So people were just, I mean, I know Jillian has come out and said her contestants that were girls, she would try to have them eat about 900 calories, low fat, very low fat, low carb per day, and then burn 5,000 calories a day. I mean, that is such a recipe for metabolism killing.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So I was using metabolic carts for the better part of my career, where I was actually measuring people's metabolic rates. And the one woman that I measured who did the contest, she must have done it probably around 2010, 2011. And she had just been kicked off as well. And she had done the test to test her resting metabolic rate before, and I remember it was fairly normal. By the time we did the test, her resting metabolic rate should have been about 2,000 calories, and it had already reduced by half. So it was already around 1,000 calories. And she described a lot of the same thing. I remember she told me that they were working out about 6 hours a day. I remember that they were on 1,200 calorie a day diets. It sounded like, at least at that point, that sounded a little bit more structured from what I recall versus when you did it earlier on. I'm curious, like, what did you do for food? Like, do they have like endless amounts of food options that you can have? Do you have to cook or shop yourself, or like how did you sort that out?
We weren't allowed to leave, so we would tell the production assistants what we wanted. So that was actually kind of nice because you could probably order anything you want. I mean, they said you couldn't order cookies, but that would make good TV. So I kind of feel like they would have, if you would have asked for cookies, I feel like they would have brought them. So it was, the food part was nice. I mean, you could eat like a king. You definitely could. You could eat like a king because they would just bring it. You were in charge of cooking it and you were in charge of cleaning. So our kitchen was a mess because nobody ever picked up after themselves. And I've heard that same thing through everything single season, that the kitchen became a toxic wasteland because nobody ever picked up after themselves. But so the food was pretty good, but again, there wasn't really a lot of direction in my season what to eat, except when I was an at-home contestant, we got a nutritionist, a psychologist, and a doctor. We got a very specific plan. We had weekly support calls, and you could email or call anytime you wanted if you needed any support. Plus there was 36 of us, so we had community. When you get on the ranch, they didn't have hardly any direction. They were just kind of making it up. And the people that they had directing them weren't a doctor, a nutritionist, or a psychologist. I mean, Jillian has come out and admitted that prior to the show, she had helped a couple celebrities lose 5-10 pounds. She wasn't, this, obesity weight loss specialist by any means. And she admitted in multiple interviews recently that it was an experiment. Every season was an experiment where she played around with different things. So you will hear different experiences. I know one thing people talk about is that they heard about this lawsuit where people were given weight loss drugs. Not a single person I've ever talked to that was true. So if that happened to 1% of people, okay. But the 99% that I talked to, that's not our experience. It was eat very, very little and then work out all the time.
Wow. That's so interesting. That's way less organized than I would have assumed. You mentioned the trainers would only be there kind of when the cameras are on, and then they would kind of split. Did you have any type of like relationship with the trainers as far as like, they're my buddy, I can talk to them, or anything like that? Or was it really just like, they showed up, did the thing for TV and took off?
So I came in, halfway through the season. So they had already built relationships with their contestants, and I had beat their contestants, so they hated me because they were like, "This is making us look terrible." They were ticked off because they were like, "We're supposed to be the professionals, and you did this at home without
Wow.
us. That's
Wow.
not cool. And you beat us." And then the contestants themselves hated our guts because we got to be home with our family. Well, they had to be there. We weren't injured. They were, all of them. We had hand holding and tools and resources. They had almost nothing. There's no nutritionist there. There's no psychologist. They just kind of had to talk to themselves in a corner if they needed any psychological work done. Some of them did build relationships with their trainers. And to this day, when you look in our alumni group, because we have an alumni group on a private one on Facebook, they will say that they feel like they did have a relationship. But most people have commented that they felt that it was very artificial.
Interesting. Wow. It's so fascinating. Like all the tools that you were given, and assuming that, the nutritionist or the doctor or whatever that you had was like probably misguided in the information that they were giving you, but at least they were giving you something. And you mentioned something really curious, like the community aspect. So critical, regardless again of the information you're getting. That must have been incredibly helpful to feel like you had support. You weren't the only one kind of going through this. You weren't like isolated. You could actually like communicate with people that are going through kind of the same thing. That must have been huge.
100%. A couple of us got a matching tattoo of a 36 with a turtle. It's a long story, but and I just went on a cruise with one of them. So like
Ah,
we're pretty tight. Now, one thing you had said was the advice wasn't super great. I do want to say Dr. Huizenga, who was the show's doctor, I think for the entirety of the show, he did say, I mean, I was on season 3 and he said, I'm not going to be very supportive of vegetarianism. He said, I really need you guys to eat some meat. And it was either him or the nutritionist, now that I think about it, one of the two, but I'm pretty sure it was Dr. Isenga said that he had clients as a doctor in LA who were vegetarian and had heart attacks in their 40s. And that the vegetable fats were what was clogging people's arteries. So he said it was really important, he had said, to get some animal fat in there. So I thought
wow.
that was interesting that even in 2006, he knew that
That's
there was a
impressive.
place for animal protein and fat.
Wow. Wow. Yeah,
But
that's
the
very
people on the
progressive.
show, they were eating sugar-free Jello and sugar-free dressings and whatever was the commercial for the season.
Oh, funny. I didn't even think about that. Of course, they would be stocking up whatever food company products. I hadn't even thought about the product placement and something like that.
Oh, incredible. I mean, I want to say one season was Cheerios.
Part of this complete breakfast.
Yes.
Wow.
I know one of our main sponsors was Jenny-O Turkey, so we had Jenny-O Turkey coming out the rear.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure you
In
never want to
retrospect,
see that again.
at the time I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing because it's low fat meat. This is
Yeah,
great.
totally.
Thank you for
Yeah.
all the free meat. This is so wonderful. And now I'm like, that's kind of gross.
Yeah. I'm sure you'll never eat that ever again. Are there any other like interesting stories or experiences that you had while you were involved with that show?
I thought it was interesting that behind the scenes there were some romantic things happening.
Okay, nice. We're getting the
Nobody ever
fresh
talks
pulp
about
18 years later.
behind the scenes. People, they're starting to feel better about themselves. Their hormones are flowing because when you're extinguishing that fat, you're releasing a lot of extra hormones. And there was some hooking up.
That's great. You heard it here first. Again, 18 years ago, we got the fresh pulp here on Boundless Body Radio. That's great.